All right, well, good morning, everybody. Hopefully everybody is wide awake now that we had our little rearrangement. But again, thank you everyone for being flexible with that. We would love to get started, and welcome to our Immuno-Oncology Institute Telemedicine Roundtable. My name is Janelle Trang. I am a program manager in provider education at ACCC. And just thank you all for being here today. Each and every one of you is going to bring a different perspective to the conversation, and we're really excited to have all of you here with us. We have a great program in store. You all have the agenda in your folders. And what you're going to notice is there's some presentations throughout the day, but we also have a lot of time built in for discussion. So we'd love for each of you to think about those presentations as just a conversation starter and some food for thought. And then we're really going to turn to this group to really have a conversation. Everyone is encouraged to participate and to share their thoughts. And we're looking forward to hearing what you all have to say. Just a couple housekeeping items before we get started. We do have Wi-Fi available. It's the conference, Marriott conference option, and then the passcode is ACCC 19. Bathrooms are out and around to the right if you need them. We are going to have refreshments in the back all day, so please feel free to help yourself. And just a reminder that we are live streaming today, so hello to everyone who is attending virtually. Please feel free to send in questions through the chat box. We'll be checking in throughout the day on that. And yeah, looking forward to getting started. I would like to invite Dr. Lee Schwartzberg, the Executive Director of the West Cancer Clinic and Chair of our IO Institute Executive Committee, to make some opening remarks.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to this meeting. It's a very busy time of the year. Not only do we have the holidays, but we have the American Society of Hematology meeting going on right now, which some of you have attended, and the San Antonio Breast Cancer meeting starting tomorrow. So in a very busy time, we really appreciate everyone making time for this important meeting, and we're expecting a terrific day and really some great work product to come out of the day today. We met last night to consider what will be the future of the ACCC Immuno-Oncology Institute. As most of you know, we're entering our 5th year. And we put together this institute because we recognized early on that there were practical needs for the initiation of IO into the community. And those remain critical needs as we now have some maturity of using some of the IO agents, and we will be continuing to shift our focus. But what we know is that there are still challenges in maintaining equity in delivery of IO medicine and managing the long-term toxicity and improving quality of care in our community centers as it relates to IO and all care. We're moving into a future that is value-based, and that has come in fits and starts, but at least in my opinion, we are moving in that direction, whether it's through federal reimbursement or through private payers. And we have to consider how we're going to implement these incredible advances in IO in a way that will allow us to pay for them and will allow a new mechanism of understanding how best to deliver value as it comes to IO. And then promoting research and clinical trials is something we talked about last night, something that we're going to get into as we move forward for the future of the IO Institute. We're in a situation where there is over 800 trials currently open today with IO agents, either as single agents or in combination with other IO agents or in chemotherapy. And we simply have to be more creative in getting patients to enroll on these trials so we can understand the benefit of new IO agents and get them to our patients faster. So if you really look at the future of IO, it's incredibly bright. I think we'd all agree. This year alone, we've seen multiple approvals for some of the agents that have been around for years and new agents coming fast and furious. The FDA has made it available and has fast-tracked a number of these agents, so they're out there, and it's hard to keep up, and our providers have difficulty, and really all of our systems have difficulty keeping up with that, and it's another important component of the IO Institute. And we're also very excited about the continued development of cellular-based therapies. We'll talk about that today to a great extent. And for example, at the ASH meeting, there's been tremendous advances, and we'll probably see the development or the approval of cellular-based therapy in a third disease, multiple myeloma, coming in 2020. And this is just the dawn of the era of not only looking at it for hematologic malignancies, but possibly solid tumors going further. So today, our focus is on telemedicine in oncology, and specifically as it relates to IO. Now, why do we need this? It's clear that we're facing a situation where we're going to see more cancer patients just from demographics of baby boomers reaching the age where the incidence of cancer is at peak. The number of providers in oncology is not going up. The number of fellows that are graduating and taking their place as providers actually is probably less than those of the generation of oncologists that I belong to are beginning to retire. So we actually have a situation where we're going to be in a net negative state for providers, and we need to be creative in how to fill that, and telemedicine is certainly one of the aspects there. We know that the toxicity from the checkpoint inhibitors is delayed and something that occurs weeks, months, or years later, and we need to have ways to manage this toxicity remotely because we simply can't handle the visits to the providers, and that is a situation that's a problem whether you're rural or urban. And our goal today, as we move into 2020, has been increasingly and valuably focused on the patient experience, and that experience can extend to using telemedicine. So our goals for today are to review the current telemedicine landscape and its application in oncology. We're going to discuss various applications of telemedicine, including focusing on the provider and patient experience. We'll have some case studies of using telemedicine in practice and how we can adopt that particularly to IO. Our goal really is for all of us to develop practical solutions to telemedicine implementation and how we get reimbursement for that. And let's brainstorm so we have action items to bring to the ACCC IO Institute for implementation in 2020. So again, we're very excited that you're all here, and we look forward to a very stimulating day of discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Schwartzberg. Now there are two people that I would love to introduce. Siggy Marmenstein, Chief Executive Officer, and Mark Winter, Principal of Digital Healthcare at Telehealth Consulting Services. Both Siggy and Mark have been working with us over the past 3 months or more, helping us learn more about what's happening across ACCC's membership when it comes to telemedicine and how that relates to immuno-oncology. And they are going to be our meeting facilitators throughout the day, so you can be expecting to hear from them. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them to maybe lead us through some introductions and then do a little bit of stage setting to kind of kick us off.
Great. I'd like to introduce Siggy first and maybe let her tell you a little of her background. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Siggy Marmenstein. I'm a nurse practitioner in my profession, 22 years as an NP, and I started Telehealth Consulting Services agency in 2009. Pretty much by mistake, I was asked to start a telehealth program for USC Medical Center in Los Angeles. That was a nurse practitioner-based, first of its kind telehealth program in 2009, and it was very successful. And so many other agencies start calling me and say, "Hey, can we do it? Can we replicate it? Can we do it somewhere else?" And before you knew it, I was consulting for people who had to start telehealth. So 10 years, forward, I was helping and was involved in about 68 of the largest implementation of telehealth across the country. The largest one that you probably will know was Mercy Medical Center, USC, UCLA, and LA. And I was for 5 years involved with Kaiser Southern California into telehealth implementation in various departments, Adventist Health in Montana and in Oregon, and a few other large programs. I'm myself also an owner of a telehealth program that does maternal child health. So very, very much involved and love the space. I believe that this is the way of the future. As Dr. Lee here explained to us, we have a shortage of providers. We are getting more and more rural in some areas, and a lot of hospitals are closing. We have massive amount of deserts. So this is our opportunity now to take something and do it different. And I hope that this discussion today will lead to that place. And Mark?
Thank you. So my name is Mark Winter, and I've been involved in digital healthcare, we'll call it, for over 25 years. Siggy and I have crossed over at Kaiser Permanente. I worked with George Halverson on the rollout of Epic, which was quite a nightmare. And we, in those days especially. And we moved into an interesting series of projects. One was the simulation of patient cases on computer that would validate whether nurses, nurse practitioners, and so forth would follow evidence-based practice and be able to measure quantitatively how they followed a patient through a course of care. I was the program manager for the X Prize Foundation for the Qualcomm Tricorder Prize and the Nokia Sensing Challenge that stimulated dozens of new innovations in digital health technologies. I've been the CEO of 3 companies now in the area of health technology and telemedicine. And Siggy and I have really joined forces because we see that there is large gaps and deficits in how telemedicine, as we generally call it, has been rolled out into the healthcare market over the last 20 years. In fact, it's been around for more than 30 years. So we're really excited. And I must say, I deeply appreciate, and so does Siggy, the opportunity that ACCC has provided to us to actually go through this intensive focused study and the interviews we've had with many of you, a number of you, to actually understand how this would apply specifically to immunotherapy. And Dr. Schwartz, I must say, Dr. Schwartzberg, you've made a fantastic opening for the reasons why these new forms of digital care are so crucial in the field that you're in. And we hope to really talk to you about this in detail today. So with that, shall we get started?
You go around the room maybe? And
oh, yes, that's right. We're going to do it. Yes.
I think we're going to go around the room and just kind of have everybody tell us who they are, what they do.
All right, well, thank you. Excellent introduction this morning, and also a fantastic, really kind of role here for the ACCC IO Institute and also telemedicine. We'll probably call it teleoncology, and then Lee and I will actually patent it. So we'll actually have another company spun out of it. Mark, we'll add you as the CEO. We'll make it number 4. But no, I'm actually Ollie McBride. I'm the president of ACCC. So I want to thank you all for your time today. It's a very great discussion. It's a discussion which we know will be integrative into what's happening next. And we heard Lee talk about this. We heard of your experience as well. We are in the evolution of new technologies, new therapeutic agents right now in the IO setting, both a combination of oral and IV, and with the CAR-T, BICMA, and other therapies, which will be actually moving to the outpatient setting in long distance areas for a lot of our rural populations. This is a fantastic discussion to actually come around. So I really look forward to it. I'm actually at the University of Arizona in a long-winded fashion, Cancer Center, and also from the Department of Pharmacy. So thank you very much.
Hi. And you probably didn't think you would have 2 Ziggys in this room. So I'm Ziggy Hallmeyer, and we already hugged because we're like the first Ziggys ever that we meet in the same room at a conference. So it's really cool. So I'm originally from Germany. I came to the United States for all my training and have been stuck here in Chicago now for the last 20 years. I lead the Cancer Institute there at my institution, which is Lutheran General Hospital, which is now part of the Advocate Network, and Advocate, which was the largest healthcare system in the state of Illinois, just joined the largest healthcare system just north of us in Wisconsin. So we're now Advocate Aurora. And with that, the 9th largest healthcare system in the United States. And why I'm bringing this to the table is because it's been a very interesting transition. I came directly out of fellowship into my private practice of 10 physicians at the time and was hired to be a melanoma specialist. And so we came from a very nimble environment, had a lot of phase 1 clinical trials. Really the first, we studied ipilimumab before it even had that name. It was MDX010. And so being in touch with the very first immuno-oncologic agent and studying, what this diarrhea is, and it's not irinotecan-like diarrhea, but completely different, et cetera, and going through that learning curve of now sitting as part of the 9th largest healthcare system in the US and what that means in terms of distributing care to a very large population, I think is super interesting, and I'm very excited for today to be part of this as to how telemedicine can sort of fit into the niche of, for specifically where I'm at, providing to many millions of patients who are in sometimes very rural situations and have to drive 2-3 hours. And remember, Chicagoland area, we do get snow and terrible weather, so there is a big role for this type of approach, specifically for me personally, but I'm hoping that I can also add to, from my personal experience, to the whole group's experience here as well. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lata Shivakumar. I'm the Director of Clinical Education Development at ACCC. Thank you all for being here. We're really excited that we are going to learn more about how we can bring teleoncology and possibly educational programs that I'm involved in developing to our members using some of the platforms that we discussed. Thank you.
I got it. So good morning, everyone. My name is Nikesh Kotecha. I run the informatics efforts at the Parker Institute for Cancer Immunotherapy. We're a nonprofit based in San Francisco that's put together the top cancer centers in the US and are really trying to think about how to accelerate the breakthroughs in getting these therapies out to the clinic. My day-to-day involves thinking through how to set up and deliver on systems and programs for clinical trials, research studies. I do a lot of work on the deep immune profiling end, so microbiome, cytometry, sequencing, and I also run a group that has to put all this data together. So think a lot on the cutting edge right now, and what I'm always excited about when I come to these meetings is learning a lot about how do we actually get this out in a practical way to the patients and to the broader clinics out there. So excited for the day.
Good morning. I'm Judy Meyer. I'm Director of Development for Educational Initiatives, similar to Latha, but I'm on the non-CE side. I work specifically with the IO Institute as well as some of the other foundational educational programs that ACCC provides to our membership. And we really are appreciative of you guys coming, sharing your experiences and insights as well. We know that this is a very important area for our membership, and are looking forward to kind of creating some really tangible practice changing things in the future. So thank you for your expertise.
Good morning. My name is Stormy Williams. I'm a general pediatrician by training, but I'm also the medical director and vice president of network development and innovation for children's health. Long title, which just means that I kind of oversee all of the clinical areas of our telemedicine programs. And we have close to 30 programs now that we've been doing for the last 5 years or so. We are kind of most known for our school-based telemedicine program, which has about 157 sites throughout Dallas. We are expanding. We are expanding our remote patient monitoring, but we're also expanding in our children's live format, which is where we take education to patients all over, not just Texas, but all over the country. So I'm excited to be here and to learn more about what we're trying to do. Thanks.
Good morning. I'm Gary Doolittle. I'm a medical oncologist from the University of Kansas and actually started working with our telemedicine program in 1995 as a clinician and teleoncologist. We have witnessed quite a change in the technology and the healthcare delivery system in that time frame in the last 25 years. And I can remember using these huge room-based systems and now FaceTiming with my son, who now lives in the UK, when he has a sore throat. So the world has changed remarkably and for the better. We use our system for direct patient care. We've used it for home-based services, particularly in the hospice setting. Use it for clinical trial screening, and now clinical trials actually care from a distance. It's gratifying to see that it's still exciting. So it's a pleasure being here this morning.
I'm Vicki Allen, Senior IT Director for Texas Oncology. Dr. Patton and I started the telemedicine program a few years ago, maybe 3 years ago, and we are, I think it's still fledgling. We do provider-to-provider consults with the patient in a remote location in the provider's office. But this month, we're going to be starting consults with the patients at home. So I'm very interested in hearing how some of you have done that. I'm glad to be here.
Hello, Robin Dreesen, Cancer Treatment Centers of America. I am the telehealth operations specialist, long title, not fancy, for operations. So putting it into motion, provider training, implementation. It's huge for us. If you know anything about CTCA, we have 5 locations in the US and the large majority of our patient population travel. So it's huge for us to be able to give them care at home. Thanks for having us. We're excited.
I'm Brian Dunn. I am from the Karen S. Ruban Center for Telehealth at the University of Virginia. I am a unified communications engineer for teleoncology. 80% of my time roughly is spent developing oncology programs at UVA. We have 3 community oncology sites that are, the closest is actually 15 minutes away, but the furthest is about an hour and 10. And those sites we actually acquired from a smaller organization, and we are now trying to basically get our care at the same level at those sites as if they were at the academic center. We do basically, most of what we do is provider to provider. We do about 1,500 or so video connections a year that are tumor boards, administrative meetings, things like that. And we've started to look at how do we now take that beyond the bubble of UVA. And of course, the Center for Telehealth has had over 150 partners throughout the state of Virginia, where some of our population travels from as far west as Detroit, Michigan, in Lee County to get to Charlottesville. And I myself have done that once, where I had meetings 5.5 hours from UVA and then went to see one of my providers. So it is not a fun thing. And so we're trying to see how we can keep our sickest patients from having to travel.
Hi, I'm Sarah Moravsky. I'm a PA at Vanderbilt Ingram Cancer Center. I am a hematology, oncology, and stem cell transplant PA. And this past year, we've developed an outpatient CAR-T telemedicine program that is all PA and NP delivered, that occurs overnight to provide a higher level of safety and another checkpoint with our patients. I'm really excited to be here and hear from all of you guys.
Hi, Una Hopkins. I'm now the Director of Research at Montefiore Medical Center for the entire system. I came from a small community hospital, which was part of the Montefiore's health system. And most recently, what we did with telehealth, when we were the first part of the hospital to do anything with it, is our genetic counselor was going to Boston, and we needed her. And she was a valuable employee. And so, therefore, we maintained our program by allowing her to do telemedicine and getting that set up. So part of our biggest challenges were the technology part of it, so we as clinicians sometimes are not always as techy as we need to be. So that was really her biggest challenge. And so helping her get over that was really a very successful story. So.
Great. I'm Monique Dawkins. I'm the Assistant Director of Provider Education with ACCC. I'm very excited and grateful to have such a diverse group of experts in the room, and looking forward to the discussion for today. I manage the program managers that implement and disseminate the educational programs that we develop at ACCC. So we're excited to have this as part of our portfolio.
Good morning. I'm Amanda Patton. I'm Senior Manager Content and Editorial at ACCC. I'm going to echo what my colleagues have said. Thank you all so much for being here. We're very grateful, and I'm excited to learn from you all today.
Morning. I'm Mark Ferries. I'm a surgical oncologist and co-director of the cutaneous oncology program at the Angeles Clinic. And Angeles has been in immuno-oncology from the very beginning as well. And I think from my perspective, that group is now part of the Cedars-Sinai network overall. And so it's been an interesting process of integration into this larger network. And we use telecommunications, I guess, both on a P2P basis from us to the medical center, because it can take somewhere between 20 minutes and an hour to get there, depending on traffic. And just the efficiencies mean that we need to be having tumor boards and those sorts of meetings across town via wire. But we also have a large population of patients that come down from the Central Valley. And so this time of year, we're always thinking about, is the 5 freeway going to be closed? Is the 5 freeway going to be on fire? And so this will be an important component for us as well.
I'm Shannon Bessel. I'm a nurse with Northwest Medical Specialties. I'm the treatment services manager. We currently have 5 clinics in the Pacific Northwest, and I'm just really looking forward to seeing how we can probably implement telemedicine to help further our patient satisfaction and safety.
Becky Bounds from the TEXLA Telehealth Resource Center out of Lubbock, Texas Tech in Lubbock, Texas. Keep in mind, by the way, that it's 13-mile drive, but east to west or north to south in Texas. I'm also representing the National Consortium of Telehealth Resource Centers. We are federally funded to provide tools, resources, outreach, and education to help you get started with telehealth.
Good morning. I'm Matt Bouchonville. I'm an endocrinologist at the University of New Mexico, and I'm here to represent a nonprofit telementoring program called Project Echo, and thanks for having me.
Hi, I'm Laurie Williams. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Symptom Research at MD Anderson, and we have been doing what I consider low-tech telehealth for maybe 20 years, where we have been assessing patient symptoms with automated phone systems, and we really think it has made a difference. We've talked to patients about how they feel about it, and so I'm here to kind of present the patient experience.
And again, I'm Janelle Trang. I'm a program manager at ECCC, and I work with my colleagues in the room as well as our IO Institute Executive Committee to implement some of our educational initiatives under the IO Institute.
Okay, we'll get started. What a great group. Thank you all for coming. I think that we should start with some of the obvious points that have already come out actually in this discussion. Clearly, this is a patient-centric, patient-focused effort, and being able to get far better immediate attention to patients, especially those with rapidly emerging conditions, is one of the great value propositions. But also something that the healthcare industry doesn't do well is quantify the cost to patients for traveling to care. And that is absolutely an important facet of what we're all talking about today. And the other thing is far better compliance because of regular engagement with the patient who is distant that can ultimately result in better outcomes. But there's also provider benefits that are crucially important. The ability to respond faster after hours and not necessarily be in clinic to do it. In fact, to be anywhere. So many physicians complain about being chained to their clinics, their offices, their locations. And the technology has the potential to free many medical providers so they can work with patients no matter where they are, improving the logistics. Greater flexibility in when and how patients can be seen, basically. And then one of the things that's really emerging rapidly, and finally, is that CMS and private insurers are opening the taps and starting to significantly improve reimbursement. This year, we saw remote patient monitoring dramatically expand in terms of reimbursement potential. And these sorts of digital sessions that have been constrained by the geographic location of patients, who was attending to them, and all these things are starting to be relieved in the system, which is really terrific. Let's talk a little bit about something that is really confusing, and that is you hear, if you go to an ATA conference or a HIMSS, you hear people talk about telehealth, telemedicine, digital health, and all kinds of other things, and nobody has the same idea in mind at all. Generally speaking, it's been thought that telehealth is actually a broader superset of the overall field, one that can incorporate everything, including advice services like Siggy's Baby Life Advice that provide guidance and advice, but not medical care. Whereas telemedicine has been generally thought, to be something that has more specificity to actual medical care delivered digitally in some way. However, as we'll talk about later, I think in many ways we should cast off the words telehealth and telemedicine and move toward the notion of digital healthcare. And then ultimately, as Don Jones at Qualcomm used to say, let's just call it healthcare. That's where it really needs to be. So I want to talk a little bit also about the confusion in terms of the range of what this is, because we find in our consulting capacity lots of confusion about what telemedicine, telehealth is as a practical medium. We have a spectrum, everything from phone and text chat systems that are telemedicine, to purely audio-visual communications, to then EHRs that have plugged in a video window. And then there is a new form of what we call more comprehensive digital healthcare that unifies vital signs, a lot of medical records and lab reports, a full medical record, all inside of the framework of a video communication system. And I brought some of these along, show and tells. A lot of different kinds of personal instruments can now generate data at home that a clinician can see real time or sequentially. So that is sort of what the future may hold here. So the thing that we have also seen is a lack of good thinking about how you map the clinical needs to the actual capabilities of the platform. And from our interviews with a number of you here, we got some clear concepts down. One is that you've really got to understand the clinical requirements and what the outcome goals are. Many hospitals, we've seen very large ones that shall go unnamed, have embarked on telemedicine initiatives, and they buy the technology and then figure out how to fit it to the actual clinical requirement. That is completely backwards. So that has to change. The other thing we heard over and over again from many of you is the importance of workflow and understanding the workflow process and ensuring that the telehealth platform doesn't distort or alter the way clinical care is delivered in person. And we strongly believe in that. And there's another thing that is crucial is understanding the difference or the important difference and relationship between the EHR and the telehealth platform and what their relationships are. Some are tightly bound together, others are completely independent and separate systems, but they all have to ultimately kind of converge in terms of the source of truth about the patient. So that's something that has to be looked at. We've heard over and over again that the IT organization should be engaged. But I can also tell you of many times when we have observed IT organizations being told by the chief financial officer or somebody, or the CEO, hey, let's go get some of that telemedicine and get that stood up. And they conveniently forget the clinical team that has to use it. So then they deploy it and people go, what are we going to do with this? Or I don't have time for it, or any of a number of reasons why that's a problem. So our view is while the IT organization is critically important, the clinical team has to lead. There's no way around that. That's another important aspect. And Robin, I think, actually, and I talked about this, modeling and testing and validating before you really go live in advance to work out the kinks in the workflow is very, very crucial as well. And Sarah, I think you and I also discussed that. And then finally, provide enough time and enough patience to get into this thing. What we see is sometimes people have definitive deadlines where they're going to turn the switch on the service, but the organization is not culturally or even technically ready to really do it. So those are sort of the big takeaways that we got out of this. And by the way, break in here.
I'll let you go ahead.
So the things that we found generally that were most common in the group, in the cohort that we talked to. Yes, go ahead, please.
I want to give you a little bit of a background on how we even got here, because maybe that's something that's missing in this conversation. Janelle and Monique found me, I don't even know how, actually, to be very honest with you, but found a company and said we wanted to embark on this study. We wanted to understand what is happening in our own institutions, right? How are they engaging in telehealth? And also get our view on it as well as we are kind of studying the ACCC institutions around where are you guys at. So really, me and Mark were engaged by you guys to understand and get a deeper understanding of where is the institution stands right now, where are we at right now. And so through a series of interviews and in some cases we also went to the site that Mark traveled to some sites, we created a body of evidence, okay, that allows us to kind of look at where things are at right now and make recommendation for future development at the ACC as an institution, to immuno-oncology, but in general to like Ali said maybe tele-oncology. So just to give you a little bit of background, why are we here and how did we get here? And so for the last 3 months, that's what we've been engaged in. We've been engaged in interviewing and talking and also studying the area of this. And through a very large literature review, which I will speak about later, we also found where do we stand today. I have to say, and to Janelle and Monique's, thank you for that, because you don't see that happening usually. Usually, like Mark have said, people will jump into the implementation without even having a clear understanding of where the institutions are standing in right now. And this has been a great exercise in finding out the baseline. And so this is the baseline, just to let you know.
Incidentally, there is a paper that we have written of some 30 pages or so that will be published by ACCC as well, that is sort of the companion to this, that will be coming in. It will have all of the references and research that we did, a lot of the things in more depth that I'm talking about today in summary. What we found in the group was that we had this spectrum of things. We had genetic counseling, which is an obvious application in which pure video alone is sufficient. And we found that it was consistently used because it helps the person on the other end of the line really read the reactions and guide the conversation in what could be life-altering information you pass to a patient. Then there were generalized monitoring of patients on a particular protocol. I think that, Gary, you and I had extensive discussions about how that has been in use for some time in Kansas broadly, to really keep an eye on patients and have more of an observational line on them as they're going through treatment and care in a more timely way. And then the other area that has been very interesting is what Sarah has been involved in, is when you have agents that are super toxic or that have the potential to really have major impacts rapidly on a patient, such as CAR-T, being able to get rapid response and an integrated response between home access and communications and getting them rapidly back in for care. And knowing that the process of getting them from home there has continuity. Everybody's on board, they know what's going on. That sounded very important to this process. And so those are the things that we're hearing from the group that are actively used today. So one of the things that you might ask yourself, well, in that sort of a genre of things that are being done here in oncology-related telemedicine, what is the platform that's prevailing that is used today? And of course, that was very interesting to us. And what we found is that pure audio-video services that are commercially available, such as Zoom, and also the services that can be employed inside an EHR were the two prevalent methods. We did not hear very much about phone or text in the system, although, Laurie, we'd like to hear more about that from Mayo, for sure. And many of the organizations have not even begun to touch on remote monitoring yet, or more advanced forms of digital healthcare, as I prefer to call it. So that was very interesting. There we go. So let's talk about RPM for a minute. The field has advanced enormously in the last few years in terms of the availability of FDA-cleared instruments. When the thing started, it was more about Fitbits, right, and activity trackers, which were not clinically valid in many cases. I mean, it was a nice piece of information, but there was nothing out there that could really easily allow a patient, for example, to get a heart rate or even be able to get an auscultation on their own. Today, we have instruments that actually do that. In fact, we'll take heart rate and auscultation at one time and be able to display that on screen real time. Those are pretty remarkable advances. And they are now being reimbursed in many cases as well, along with standard vital signs that would go along with this. So there is really a great opportunity for better documenting physiological change. And to your point about value-based care, one of the fascinating things about MACRA and MIPS today is that it absolutely has no documentation requirement for actually measuring physiological change over time. There's a million pieces of paper you can file, but that's something that is going to happen, because the only way you can measure outcome change, and really for a given demographic in a patient, whether they're getting better, worse, or staying the same, is to be able to measure those physiological changes. And that is something that these instruments can enable, and I know that we're going to see CMS, Seema Verma is already talking about it, is going to start to impose more rigor on collecting that data. And then finally, The patient themselves benefits from using these instruments because they get a window into their own physiology. Right. They begin to see relationships between the medications they're on, the food that they intake, and other exercise and other things, and how it relates to the goals that they have clinically. So it's a valuable resource for the patient as well. And what that might look like is a patient, and by the way, patients don't need to have all those instruments, but an array of different instruments that are pertinent to their care can be captured by smartphone or by a hub of some type at home. It can be monitored and seen at home easily, and then that status can be tracked by a PA or a physician or anything in between that ultimately can allow scheduled care to occur because they're seeing a trend or a pattern with those vital signs and data, and be able to real time schedule an appointment with that patient to get them going. That virtuous cycle of care has tremendous potential. And that potential is this: the ability, because of more timeliness and more efficiency in the way that you're collecting data and responding to the patient, and this would be absolutely crucial in the oncology field, to keep them out of hospitalization and high acuity care, because you can get in front of the problem faster. You can respond to it faster. So I think that's sort of conceptually the big goal for a lot of these technologies as we move forward. So summary, for patients and family members, obviously it's saving a lot of time and effort and hassle, especially if they're remote and rural. In some cases, and we see this over and over again, patients simply do not seek out care. And Gary, you and I talked a lot about this in Kansas. They just give up because they don't have the time or resources, especially if they're elderly, particularly if they're acutely ill, to be able to get transported, to that location for care. Obviously, more regular checkups and regular contact with a physician has huge psychological benefits as well as physiological benefits, and that creates this greater sense of safety and security that sometimes can be one of the keys to making them a patient that's getting well as opposed to sicker. But for the people in this room, many of the clinicians here, it's time efficiency. It's being able to avoid some of that downtime, transitioning or moving from exam room to exam room, or even having exam rooms that are adequate or of enough quantity to actually serve the patient population or the panel you've got. Being able to assist in the coordination of care with many team members. I mean, we know of cancer patients that I've interviewed who are seeing 12, 14, 20 different providers of different types, sometimes at multiple hospitals. And they oftentimes don't know what each other are doing, especially if they're in different institutions. There needs to be a framework for enabling that kind of teamwork for the benefit of the patient. And then the general continuity of care is going to come from that, being able to, again, follow the patient no matter where they are, whether they are in hospital or step down, or they have been moved to an outside facility or home, and be able to really maintain continuity with them during the course of their treatment. And that is something that is really phenomenally powerful with the telemedicine framework that we're talking about today. And administrators get some benefits here. Certainly, avoidable readmissions and the economic impacts of that can be controlled, and the literature shows pure evidence that that's true, that works. So many patients get discharged without adequate instructions and real clear understanding of what they have to do at home. And the key was either send a nurse out, which is a very expensive thing to do, or be able to bring this kind of service via telemedicine in. There's a benefit from a marketing standpoint. More and more patients who have heard all about Teladoc and American Well and MD Live are asking, can I get services at home? And while we are not advocating for a moment that those sorts of commercial services are meaningful here yet, we can talk more about that. We believe strongly the hospital should be running its own program. It should not be necessarily using a commercial retail telemedicine service. And we ought to really have an active debate about that, because I'd like to get your points of view. And then finally, it solves some of the staffing resources and challenges that they always face, which you've brought up. We have a baby boom that's growing older, so we have an explosion of patients with these conditions, but we have a declining number of clinicians that can serve them, and oncologists in particular. So how it fails most? This is our laundry list. It's our David Letterman top 10. Not defining the clinical goals or objectives, as we talked about. And trying to use one size fits all is another thing that we see a mistake on. You know, sometimes you embark on this retail initiative only to discover it doesn't fit. A major hospital system on the West Coast who got all involved in one of these commercial services didn't understand that their patients would be seen by physicians who are not in their network.
Right.
And that those physicians had no medical record on them and yet were advising and prescribing. And yet they were accountable from the standpoint of liability for the services. Those disconnects are fascinating, and they are going on out there. Not mapping the clinical workflows, allowing the IT departments to just decide on their own what to do. Forcing telehealth to work with EHRs necessarily, where the EHR is resisting, or they have their own solution that they want you to use, usually at a very high price. Not buying into the clinical users and management early enough and getting them engaged, certainly, and not understanding what the reimbursement potential is. And then finally, not really measuring, once you put it into place, how well it's working and whether or not it's really satisfactory for all of the stakeholders. So our key takeaways, there's no doubt about it that this field that you're all involved in can be a huge lifesaver. It can be a transformative solution for either having a good outcome or a bad outcome, depending upon your access to the patient. So accessibility is crucial. And again, knowing those clinical goals is so important, getting the workflow right, engaging in that whole team, but also starting to track and manage the cost savings of this. One failure in the telemedicine industry that we see over and over again, and I sit on the board of an organization that is actually trying to get legislation through right now, is that they're constantly asking for real data as to whether or not they can prove cost effectiveness or actually moving the dial on lower costs in care. And the industry gets really an F for documenting this successfully. And finally, and we want to talk about this more maybe later in the day, and we can show you some examples, there's a real opportunity to move way beyond just video to something that is more comprehensive and a better tool set for especially oncologists who are trying to get a real complete comprehensive understanding of a patient. So that is where we are, and I'd like to open the conversation up both to the audience that's online and of course to this group as to this sort of summary that we've just given you and answer any questions.
I want to make one comment. I think this is a great opening, right? A wonderful discussion, opening up the potential possibilities. And I saw two things I wanted to know. One, I think the discussion on CAR-T will be an incredible evolution for what that will be. I think there may be some limitations for visual piece, especially when it comes to rash and other variations on the skin for dermatological pieces. But one thing that was missing, which I thought is something that maybe we can also delve into, maybe it's a future discussion as well, is oral oncolytics, right? We know that this is a larger area, about 25 to 35% of the emerging therapies in oncology are orals. In fact, with IOs, we know the combination for success will even be critical for oral and IV combination, which makes it even tougher to address. So I think there is a unique opportunity there, which wasn't discussed, but definitely could be looked at, especially with the advent of microchipped oral medications. And I don't know if anyone has seen this or what's out there. They're already being used by a few.
One of our interviews mentioned this.
Yep, it's called Proteus Technologies, and there's a few others coming up. So they have RFID chips. They're also allowing you to do temperatures, the pulse rate, activity, just like an activity watch. You wear it every 7 days. So I think that is also a discussion as we're doing a connection between our physicians, our advanced practitioners, our nurses, and also our pharmacists across the board, really addressing outcomes based on care. But all of those outcomes, if we can maintain outcomes which are value-based, right? Prolonging efficacy of a drug therapy, adhering to that therapy or combination, I think this directly integrates and also evaluates the opportunity for value-based care in an optimal fashion, rather than knowing that there's a lack of adherence, so we can address some of those issues early on. But hopefully that kind of adds to that discussion as well.
Absolutely, yes.
Just a couple of other use cases that came up as you were putting this. So one of the things I think we should talk about is specifically remote physiologic monitoring as it relates to cancer patients. So I think it's pretty different. You know, we already have now, and your pictures showed remote blood pressure monitoring and heart rate. Those are not the things that actually are most important to oncology patients. Knowing the white count 10 days after chemotherapy, that's important.
Right.
And there are technologies that are being developed for that so that the patient doesn't have to travel 100 miles to get a CBC or to get a CBC locally and we don't get it till the next day. So things like that. And at the other end of the spectrum, I'm interested, it's not directly focused on IO, but it's very important to all our patients, which is end of life care or pre-end of life care, actually, I think is an area that we've not done a good job of. So when a patient transitions to hospice, obviously the reimbursement changes, and my own personal experience is it's sometimes a struggle to remain engaged in the patient's care, which is a really misalignment of incentives. I've taken care of patients for 10 years. Now they go on hospice. Somebody else is making that's a whole other story. But even there, even if there wasn't reimbursement, having telehealth there would be really very valuable from a patient experience. But there's also this pre-hospice time, and maybe, as we know, not all patients get to end-of-life care at the appropriate time and spend enough time perhaps in hospice. So more interactions, particularly as patients become frailer. And so we have this paradox where we're actually interacting less with patients as they get sicker instead of more. So in oncology, I think that's a great opportunity.
Maybe even talking about social determination of health, right? And how do they come into oncology care? Two things that did come out from the study for me personally as a nurse and as a provider. I work in emergency medicine, so we get to see a lot of those patients coming to the emergency room because they have no other access point. That is, through the literature review, I think that we did find some ways where we can avoid that. But integrative care, right? Looking at people's social determination, their ability to have food securities, travel securities, housing securities, and others, and the mental health side of it. The mental health that is so important in cancer care is almost like through the study and in general, I've noticed that has not been really put a lot of, in general, we have a real problem with mental health in our country, but in cancer care, I think it's so important, right, to support this patient mentally throughout, where telehealth is so perfect for that, right? Because at least for that, you don't need to have any therapeutics, you don't need to have any peripherals, but you need to have somebody there who can consult and talk and support the patient and empower them to make certain kind of decisions. And I think that is a great opportunity in this area to support the patients.
Quick question from this end too. The issues with cost, Mark, I mean, maybe you could elaborate on that a little bit more. I mean, we've studied our oncology practice 4 or 5 different times, and every single one of our studies showed that about 15% of expenses were technology related, and the rest were really human factors, human time, supportive type work that we do in our clinics every day anyway. And that was at a time when the technology was a lot more expensive than it is now. I do think it's interesting, and always fascinated me in the telemedicine world that we focus so much on the cost, and yet no one asked Gary Doolittle, how much should we charge for that first dose of ipilimumab, right? No one who told Bristol that we'll pay you $40,000 a dose, but we'll charge $120,000 a dose before you get it. There's something about this particular health delivery system that everyone has that cost focus, and yet cost is really in the background. It really is all about the people that are staffing the practices at either end. Any thoughts about that? I mean, as you were doing your research and everything about why this is something that we keep coming back to in this particular delivery mechanism?
A little closer, because we're not hearing you.
Sorry, that's shocking because I have it big now.
There's some really interesting institutional differences between organizations. You and I discussed the mission at your university teaching center is in a way commissioned by the state of Kansas to solve remote care problems, because that's an inherent issue in your state. Other organizations, have commercial concerns and the ability to get reimbursed and put greater emphasis on that. So I think that there is sort of a different bias, you might say, about reimbursement, depending upon the nature of the organization and how its mission is set up. And I think in your case, the organization said many years ago, this is an inherent problem of care delivery. We're going to bake it in, and we're not going to screw down every bit of reimbursable dollar that we can get. Besides, reimbursement is challenged or has been challenged for quite some time. That is changing. But I think that what I think that our research showed is that when organizations look at the importance of the care delivery process, ultimately, especially for value-based or at-risk, as a integrated part of their care delivery and forget about trying to get every reimbursable dollar out of it, they ultimately wind up implementing it best and getting the most positive results out of it, is what we found consistently. And the ones that are really stuck on trying to wring somehow reimbursable dollars out of every visit are the ones that actually have the greater difficulty making it make sense economically. I see nodding heads. Does that make sense to everybody?
And we're going to dive into some of that a little bit later
Yeah.
in the day.